You wake up in a house that belongs to the state. This is the first thought that crosses your mind every morning. Not gratitude, not guilt, just the quiet recognition of a fact that has stopped feeling like a fact and started feeling like the natural order of things. The bedroom is 40 feet long. The ceiling is decorated with work that took craftsmen 14 months to complete. The bed itself cost more than most families in this country earn in 3 years, and it was paid for by a procurement budget that listed it as executive residential infrastructure maintenance. 14 people are waiting outside your bedroom door before you have opened your eyes. You know this because it has been true every morning for 6 years, and because the silence on the other side of the door has a specific quality. The held breath silence of people who are ready, who have been ready for some time, who will remain ready until you are prepared to receive them. Your principal secretary. 2 aides. The head of your security detail. A woman who manages your schedule and has not taken a day off in 4 years because you haven't. And she understands that her proximity to you requires a matching standard of availability. Others whose specific functions blur into the general machinery of moving you through a day. The motorcade is already running in the courtyard below. 7 vehicles. Outriders front and back. The road between here and the office will be cleared before you reach it. Police stationed at every intersection, traffic held, the city briefly reorganized around your movement, the way planets organize around a gravitational center. You did not ask for this. It was given to you along with everything else when you won. And you have stopped noticing it the way you stopped noticing the air. You stand at the mirror. The face looking back at you has been on television more times than you can count. It has been on billboards and campaign posters and the front pages of newspapers that loved you and newspapers that have spent 6 years trying to destroy you. 40 million people have an opinion about this face. Cartoonists have drawn it. Protesters have burned it on cardboard. Supporters have printed it on fabric and worn it against their skin. This face is public property in a way that your actual face, the one that existed before all of this, has not been for a very long time. You straighten your collar, you go to work. The official salary is $180,000 per year. You spent more than that on a single dinner in Geneva last month and felt nothing. Not guilt, not pleasure, just the flat transactional completion of an evening that needed to happen for reasons that had nothing to do with the food. The dinner was attended by 3 men whose companies are currently bidding on infrastructure contracts worth a combined $4.7 billion. The contracts have not yet been awarded. The dinner was not about the contracts. Nothing is ever about the thing it is about. The real income moves differently. It flows through 7 layers of legal architecture that took 3 lawyers and an accountant 2 years to construct, and that is, in the technical sense, entirely legal. Construction contracts awarded through a government tender process to a company registered in the UAE, which is a subsidiary of a holding company registered in the British Virgin Islands, which has a management agreement with a firm in Luxembourg that is beneficially owned by a trust whose beneficiaries include your brother-in-law, his wife, and 2 of their children who are currently at universities in London and Toronto. Your brother-in-law has never won a competitive tender. He has won 34 government contracts worth a combined $2.3 billion over 8 years. The tender committees that evaluated these contracts were staffed by people who were appointed by a ministry whose minister was appointed by you. The evaluations were conducted according to proper procedure. The scoring criteria were met. Everything was documented. The documentation is impeccable. That is the second lesson. The first being distance, which is that the paperwork must always be perfect because perfect paperwork is a wall that investigators exhaust themselves against. Your finance minister is a man named Rashid who has been with you since the beginning. He is loyal not because he believes in you. He stopped believing in you sometime around year 2 and you in him around the same time. But because in 2019, he moved $40 million through a series of transactions that violated 4 separate laws in 3 jurisdictions, and you have a complete record of every transfer. He knows you have it. You have never discussed it directly. You don't need to. The file exists, and he knows it exists, and that knowledge shapes every decision he makes in ways that explicit discussion would only complicate. This is called governance. Your attorney general has a similar file. Your chief of intelligence has a different kind of leverage. Not financial but personal, the kind that ends marriages and careers simultaneously. The 2 senior judges whose courts handle the cases that matter have been managed through a combination of appointment, financial consideration, and the quiet understanding that their comfort depends on the continuation of an arrangement that serves everyone at the table. You did not build this system. You inherited the architecture and improved it. Every government before yours operated some version of this. The difference between a corrupt government and a clean one is not the presence or absence of these mechanisms. It is the sophistication of their construction and the discipline of their operation. Amateur corruption is visible. Professional corruption is infrastructure. You walk into your morning briefing and sit at the head of the table and listen to 7 people tell you about 7 different aspects of a country you run, and you ask the right questions and make the right notes, and at no point does anyone in the room say anything true. Elections are not won. They are managed. The distinction matters because winning implies a contest whose outcome is uncertain, and you have not participated in an uncertain contest since your first election 12 years ago when you were still the kind of person who needed to. Now the uncertainty is managed the way a river is managed, not stopped, because stopping it would be visible and violent but channeled, redirected, its energy directed toward outcomes that have been decided before the voting begins. You control 3 of the 6 major television channels. Not directly. The ownership is held through the same layered architecture as everything else, but effectively, in the sense that their editorial direction reflects your interests in ways that their journalists understand without being explicitly instructed. The other 3 channels are critical. 2 of them are genuinely independent and produce journalism that occasionally causes you problems. Their broadcast licenses come up for renewal every 4 years. They know this. The journalism continues because you need it to. A media environment with no critical voices looks like what it is, but it is calibrated journalism. Criticism that stops precisely where the serious damage would begin. The opposition leader is a man named Tariq. You have known Tariq for 20 years. He is intelligent, principled in the way that people are principled before they have real power, and genuinely popular in the northern provinces where your support has always been weakest. He believes he is your adversary. He is, in a more accurate sense, your most carefully managed asset. You know his finances completely. A team of 3 people does nothing but monitor his financial ecosystem. You know about the property transaction in 2017 that was structured in a way that could be described, depending on the investigators and the prosecutors involved, as either aggressive tax planning or fraud. You have not used this information? Unused leverage is worth more than deployed leverage because deployed leverage is a one-time event and unused leverage is permanent weather that shapes every decision the other person makes. The social media operation runs from a building in an industrial district that officially houses a digital marketing company. 340 people. 12,000 accounts across 6 platforms. The accounts are not bots. That is detectable and therefore amateur. They are operated by real people whose job it is to be convincing members of the public with histories and personalities and posting patterns that have been cultivated over years. They do not create false information. Creating false information is a beginner's approach that produces debunkings and backlash and ultimately strengthens your opponents. What they do is more sophisticated. They find true information that is ambiguous or stories that are accurate but incomplete, and they flood the surrounding context with doubt. They make the truth feel complicated. They make certainty feel naive. In a world where people cannot tell what is real, they default to their prior beliefs, and your prior believers stay yours. A journalist publishes an investigation on a Tuesday morning. It is accurate. Every fact is correct, every figure is sourced, every document is genuine. It describes in careful detail the relationship between the Luxembourg firm and the government contracts, and your brother-in-law's remarkable record in competitive tenders. It is the best piece of journalism published about you in 6 years, and you read it at 6 a.m. with something close to professional respect for the work. You make 3 phone calls before 7 a.m. The first is to the editor of the channel that published it. Not threatening, never threatening, just a conversation between 2 people who have known each other a long time and who both understand what is and is not in each other's interests. The second is to a government revenue authority whose director you appointed 18 months ago for exactly these moments. The third is to someone whose title does not exist officially but whose function is the management of situations like this one. By noon, the journalist is being publicly investigated for tax irregularities. By evening, the story has been buried under a counter-narrative about opposition funding from foreign sources that the social media team has elevated with the efficiency of a military operation. By the following morning, the journalist's investigation has become in the public conversation. A he said, she said ambiguity that reasonable people can disagree about. You sit at your desk that evening and notice that you feel nothing about this. Not satisfaction, that guilt, the residual discomfort that used to accompany these moments in the early years. Just a flat professional completion of a problem that required solving. The absence of feeling where feeling used to be is something you noticed in year 3 and accepted in year 4 and stopped noticing in year 5. That absence is the thing that should frighten you. It does not. The loyalty structure begins showing cracks in year 6, not betrayal. Betrayal is dramatic and detectable and can be managed. What happens instead is subtler and more dangerous. A gradual recalibration, visible only to someone paying close attention, in the behavior of people who are quietly doing the arithmetic on whether you will still be standing when their own futures require a stable surface to stand on. Your finance minister, Rashid, the man with the $40 million file hanging over him, has a meeting on a Wednesday afternoon that you were not told about. One meeting with a man who works for a foreign embassy, whose government has, in recent months, been making noises about governance and accountability and the importance of institutional integrity in developing economies. You know about the meeting because the man from the embassy reports, through 2 intermediaries, to someone on your intelligence payroll. But the fact of meeting, the fact that Rashid had it without mentioning it, without any of the casual disclosure that characterizes the behavior of someone who is still fully committed, is a data point that changes the temperature of everything. You say nothing to Rashid. You smile at him across the cabinet table. You include him in 3 decisions that signal continued trust. and you begin the quiet process of building a replacement architecture that does not require him. The international pressure arrives differently than you expected, not sanctions. Sanctions are a political statement that requires political will that most foreign governments reserve for situations more urgent than yours. What arrives instead is the quiet freezing of accounts in 2 European jurisdictions, accounts that officially have no connection to you, accounts that are separated from your name by the full 7 layers of the architecture. The freezing is described publicly as part of a routine anti-money laundering review. It is not routine. Someone gave someone something, and the 7 layers turned out to be 6 layers in a jurisdiction that you underestimated. Your son is photographed at a party in Dubai. The photographs show him in a context that raises questions. Not illegal questions, not the kind of questions that produce charges, but the kind that produce headlines, and the kind of headlines that produce the particular problem of your family becoming the story rather than your government. You spend $2 million ensuring the photographs do not circulate. They do not circulate publicly. They exist somewhere in the possession of someone, and someone's identity is not fully clear to you. And that uncertainty, the knowledge that something exists it cannot fully locate or control, is a new kind of discomfort that the first 5 years of power did not produce. Everything exists somewhere now. This is the thing that your mentor, the man who ran his country for 22 years before a negotiated exit that preserved his assets and his freedom, did not have to manage. His era produced paper. Paper could be burned. Paper could be lost. Paper a physical location that could be secured or destroyed. What exists now is different. Distributed, copied, transmitted, held in servers in jurisdictions that do not respond to your phone calls or your leverage or your architecture. An old ally stops returning calls, not suddenly. Gradually, the response time lengthening from hours to days to the specific silence that communicates without stating. He gives an interview where every sentence is technically supportive and the overall impression is of someone carefully building distance. You have done exactly this to others. You recognize every word of it. The inner circle shrinks. 14 trusted people become 8, become 4. Of the 4 you are not certain about one, and you cannot determine which one. This uncertainty, the inability to identify the weak point, is more exhausting than any external pressure because it is inside the room, inside every meeting, inside every conversation that you now have with the people closest to you while running a parallel analysis of whether they're still fully yours. You lie awake in the state residence in the last hour before dawn, not with dramatic insomnia. Just the quiet wakefulness of someone whose mind will not complete its last calculation before the light comes. You run the architecture. You check the layers. You assess each person in the inner circle against the evidence available. You think about the 7 layers and whether 7 is still enough or whether you need 8 or whether the question of layers has become the wrong question entirely. You find a photograph in a desk drawer one afternoon. You don't know why you opened that drawer. You never opened that drawer. But you open it and find a photograph from your first campaign. 12 years ago, a village in the northern province, you shaking hands with a farmer outside his house. You are young in the photograph in a way that is not only physical. The smile is real. You can tell because you remember real smiles, and this is one of them. The farmer's expression contains something that you've spent 6 years being the object of and have not seen clearly in some time. It takes a moment to identify it. It is hope. Genuine, uncomplicated, directed at you specifically, based on the belief that you were what you said you were. You look at that photograph for a long time. You cannot determine the exact moment when you stop being that person. Not a single decision, not a single morning when you woke up different. A gradual process of small choices, each of which was justifiable in its context and which accumulated into something that the person in that photograph would not recognize. You put the photograph back in the drawer, you go back to work. There is a version of this that ends well. You know this because you have studied the ones who managed it. The leaders who read the moment with sufficient accuracy and sufficient honesty to understand that the moment for negotiating an exit had arrived while the exit was forced upon them. Who left with immunity agreements quietly signed in jurisdictions that honored them. Who left with the foreign accounts intact and the architecture standing and a legacy that history, with the passage of time and the chaos of their successors, revised upward into something approaching respectability, stability. The authoritarian who kept the lights on, the strongman who at least kept the peace. There is another version. You have also seen this one. The tribunal that sits for 3 years and produces findings that are read into a public record that cannot be expunged. The frozen assets made permanent. The residence that stops being yours in a ceremony that is public and photographed and archived. Family members questioned in rooms that are not comfortable. The children at the foreign universities returning to a name that has become something different in their absence. You think about which version is coming. You think about whether the choice between them is still yours to make or whether someone else has already made it and you are the last person in the room to know. Power did not make you this. This is the thing you need people to understand, though you will never say it publicly and perhaps cannot say it privately because the people who might receive it are the same people you cannot fully trust. Power is not capable of making people anything. What it does is quieter and more permanent and more honest than making. It removes the conditions that previously required you to pretend. The constraints that come with poverty and obscurity and genuine accountability. The need to appear good because you cannot afford the cost of appearing otherwise. Power removes those constraints one by one as it accumulates until what is left is simply what was always there, waiting in perfect patience for the permission to exist without apology. You receive that permission completely. Not everyone does. Most people live their entire lives with the constraints in place and die having never discovered what they would have been without them. Whether this makes them better or just luckier is a question that philosophers can afford to debate because philosophers do not have to run countries. Tomorrow there is a cabinet meeting at 9 a.m. A foreign dignitary is visiting at 11. A state luncheon at 1. At 3 p.m. a contract worth $800 million in road infrastructure is being formally awarded. Your brother-in-law's company submitted the only technically qualified bid after the tender specifications were refined in a third revision that happened to align precisely with the capabilities of his firm and away from the capabilities of the two international companies that had been frontrunners. You will chair the cabinet meeting and ask the right questions. You will receive the dignitary and say the right things about partnership and shared values and the importance of good governance. You will smile at the luncheon and eat the food and make the toasts. You will approve the contract. And somewhere in a village in the northern province, the farmer from the photograph will watch the evening news and see your face and feel what has grown in the space where the hope used to be. Something heavier and more permanent than disappointment, something that does not have a clean name but that he carries the way you carry the architecture, quietly without discussing it, as simply the condition of living in a country run by a person like you. Power didn't make you this. Power doesn't make anyone anything. What it does is remove the conditions that required you to pretend. And what remains when the pretending stops is simply what was always there, waiting in every person for the permission to exist. You had the misfortune of receiving that permission completely. The farmer watching you on the news tonight had the misfortune of paying for it.